Hey guys, I'm gonna watch alternate history. What if Poland became a superpower? Looks like a interesting topic, and it's by Monsieur Z. Yeah, let's give it a watch.
Hello audience, Mr. Z here. When I say Poland, your thoughts likely turn to World War II and the Cold War, but in the olden days,
Oh, Polish, Lithuanian Commonwealth.
Poland was quite the player on the European field. Back when it was the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a fairly large state composed of modern-day Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, and parts of Russia and Estonia. Poland-Lithuania was quite capable of fending off forces from Sweden, Russia, the Ottomans, and often launching campaigns against their neighbors and assimilating territories into their own. But the Polish system of conquest was actually significantly preferable than that of other empires at the time. For one, those brought into the Commonwealth were granted religious freedoms and certain protections ensured to
Oh
Polish
yeah, that's good.
citizens. Even the governing system was incredibly liberal for the time, with a Congress and Senate who worked as checks and balances to an elected king. Militarily, the Commonwealth was no laughing matter either, having demonstrated the clear capability to fend off the Ottomans, push back Sweden, and almost conquer
Elected
Russia when
king.
it captured Moscow for 2 years. But what went wrong? Well, the people of Moscow did swear allegiance to the son of the Polish-Lithuanian king and allowed the occupation of their city, but only on the condition of maintaining their religious orthodoxy. And despite Poland's freedom of religion policy, the king declined the offer and demanded that
Oh god damn it.
he himself be made king, and declaring that he planned to convert all of Russia to Roman Catholicism.
God damn it. Just let them be freaking Orthodox. Just let them be Orthodox Christian. God damn it.
Thus, in an instant, the Russian people turned against the Poles, going as far to support a false heir to the throne impersonating a dead Dmitry II. Eventually, the Poles would be driven out by a sieging and burning of Moscow, leading them to return home and causing much mayhem on their way back. Conflicts within Sweden and within its own borders would begin to eat away at the Commonwealth, and by the early 1700s, the kingdom was destabilized and saw further assimilation to Tsar Peter's Russia and the Empire of Sweden, ultimately becoming a protectorate of the Russian Empire under Catherine the Great. But let's take things back to the occupation of Moscow.
Unfortunately.
Assume that King Sigmund of Poland accepts the terms of the Russian people and assimilates Russia into another sector of the Commonwealth ruled by his son, instead
That'd be
focusing his
cool.
own forces
That'd be pretty epic.
on the reconquering of Sweden. Because as it turns out, Sigmund of Poland used to be Sigmund of Sweden, until he was deposed by his uncle Charles IX and forced back into Poland. Sigmund's ultimate goal in life was a reconquest of his lost kingdom and the uniting of Sweden and Poland under a single crown. Had he shifted efforts funneled into Russia at the time, such an outcome wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. With Russian support and greater direction of his forces, Sigmund would gradually march his troops through Finland and towards the Swedish capital, soon retaking the throne and bringing it into the
Maybe leave Finland independent though, but probably not.
Commonwealth. Sigmund's son, Vladislavas Vasa, would go on to expand the Russian border eastward, slowly at first, but with the passing of his father and his appointment as king of the Commonwealth, he'd have even greater reign and authority to direct even further
Maybe there could eventually be, better Eastern powers as well, so that Siberia would not be controlled by a European power.
expansion. His legacy
Maybe.
would be defined by the reaching of the eastern Russian coast and consolidation of authority within the empire. The next few decades would see a Polish-dominated Eastern Europe and the development of conflicts between the Ottoman Empire and Poland, who, with aid from the Holy Roman Empire, would launch a combined assault against Turkish forces in the Balkans, and after a year of long conflict, a conquest of Istanbul, leading to a fracturing of the Ottoman Empire into smaller divisions in Arabia and North Africa. Britain
Poland wink.
would likely remain most unaffected by these changes, its affairs primarily involving France, the Americas, and internal disputes. But whereas France would become significantly more vulnerable in the absence of the Ottoman Empire, and with the growing strength of the neighboring Austrian Habsburgs, which would go on to dominate much of Germanic Europe, Poland would remain more or less non-interventionist during this period of time, only coming out of this period to assimilate Norway into their borders. By the early 1800s, the Commonwealth had grown into this monster of a nation. Now, you might think such a force to be fairly imposing, but as it would turn out, given the Polish governing structure, much of this territory is undeveloped and fairly disunited. The greatest areas of organization being centered around Sweden and what we know today as Prussia, Lithuania, and
I don't know if they'd have Korea.
Poland, while other territories within the Commonwealth are more or less autonomous, only seeing some Polish occupation or having a Polish-appointed king who held little allegiance to the Polish crown. The point is that this calm
That's
Poland
pretty
has been
cool.
experiencing is really the only thing keeping it together. Should some tragedy or conflict arise that grows too out of hand, the Polish Empire would shatter, and such an event would happen with the rise of Napoleon, who would eventually lead an invasion of Warsaw and occupy major population centers, dividing the empire, but also spreading his forces far too thin. An uprising would erupt within what remained of Poland, Lithuania, and drive Napoleon's forces out, just as Austria and Britain launched their own finishing blows to Napoleon's forces, leaving Poland a
Or maybe Napoleon would win.
shadow of its former self, and Napoleon defeated. The Prussian, Polish, and Finnish sectors of what used to be the Commonwealth would grow closer as the decades went on, and would develop a strategic union to defend against Austria, Sweden, Norway, and the new Empire of Moscow, all of which would have in earlier years made attempts to conquer and exploit these new vulnerable states. The mid-1800s would be a period of internal strife for these three states, facing a growing gap between the massive poor population and the shrinking aristocracy, which itself was becoming increasingly disillusioned with the future outlook of their nations. And it would be then that a young Karl Marx would come to prominence, with a radical new idea that would bring the poor and dissatisfied classes under a new ideology. The ideology
But that will be taken of advantage by greedy and people and authoritarianism, which is, very unfortunate. Authoritarianism is really terrible.
would come to power with relatively little conflict given the greater number of supporters against the smaller number of opposition, unifying the territories under a single red flag and inspiring within many a new aspiration of expansion, not of its own borders, but of the communist ideology. And as the population spread, so did Marx's thoughts, creating growing internal strife in an already turbulent, post-Napoleonic, innovative, and rapidly changing era. The Polish Empire would rise once again under a different flag and a new goal. This would erupt into a massive war for dominance in Eastern Europe, between monarchist Moscow to the east, which was fairly unstable as it was, and the communist Commonwealth states of the west. The war would be something of a competition of ideologies as well. While the two fought it out on their borders with little advancement, they would also expand their influences and grow their authority even further to demonstrate ideological superiority. This would ultimately end in a conquest of Moscow, however, in doing so, would have dealt the finishing blow to themselves. Having lost favor with many of their client states, leading the empire to gradually recede and former communist territories to turn to democracy or back to a parliamentary monarch system, until all that remained was the communist state of Poland, which, now being the black sheep of Europe, would see further internal strife until a reformation could be established. What happened was that the unifying force communism initially brought to Poland and its neighboring states gradually wore off, as the near-authoritarian nature of the Polish government would lead many to feel disillusioned with the communistic system, while other European states continued to prosper. Poland locked its client states in seemingly non-stop conflict, and thus ethnic groups would split off into their own states, and disagreements on communistic policy would drive further division. Eventually, there was nothing left. Poland would go on to become a democratic republic with troubled ties to Eastern Europe, but fairly good ties with Scandinavia and Western Europe. And perhaps one day, this ambitious and hardy young nation, after all it's been through, will one day reach space. Thank you.
That was cool. Enjoyed the video at least. If you enjoyed my reaction, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. And recommend videos in the comments down below. Alright, thanks for watching. Bye bye.